Well, first of all, hi, and it's great to be here once again. And I'm really happy to start recognizing the faces who have their cameras on. So you see, we do have committed watchers with us who are already following us for the last two sessions. And today we're going to speak about the most visited site in Israel. If you remember back when we started, right in the beginning, we really spoke about a term that me and Nathan came up with, the idea of bridging the gap. How to take the Holy Land, the biblical land that you read about in the Bible, and connect it to the modern day sovereign state of Israel. The two are in the same geographical territory, that we all know. But what are some of those historical connections that connect this book, of course, that plays such a big part in your life, the Bible, and a modern sovereign state in the international community? And the site we're going to be visiting today, Masada, to me allows us to, this is probably the best segue between those two different but yet very similar narratives that we're going to try and connect over here. So this is really the theme of today, to start and bridging the gap between what you read about in the Bible and the modern day country that I live in and I pay taxes in and I love to complain about. That's what we're going to start doing today, bridge that gap. And in order to do that, we're going to do a little recap of some of the things we did on our previous sessions. So I'm going to move from here to the share screen function, just so you can all see the same views that I'm looking at. So let's just try and get an idea where are some of the areas we toured so far. So you remember we started 2 sessions ago in seeing Nazareth, watching over the Jezreel Valley from Mount Precipice, which is right over here in Nazareth. And from there, we made our way to Capernaum in the northwestern part of the Sea of Galilee. And we spoke about the fact that after the reign of Herod, this area is going to be divided into sub-kingdoms, sub-territories. And we spoke about the political gains of establishing a political movement in that specific area, because this area serves as a buffer between 2 territories. In our last session, we started to talk more in depth about the importance of Jerusalem. And if you remember, we spoke about the fact that Jerusalem is the largest urban center. Jerusalem is where the temple is. Jerusalem is the place that people look up to. This is the center of Jewish spiritual and political life. And we spoke about the fact that Jerusalem at this time is on one hand under Jewish sovereignty, but really we're living under Roman reign. First represented by King Herod, later on represented by Roman governors. Now, there is already a hint to the problems which are going to come around in the future. Because you can imagine that King Herod, with all of his downfalls, and there are plenty, I'll be the first one to agree with anyone, you can't take away the fact that King Herod is a Jew. But once you start appointing foreign governors coming from Rome, not knowing anything about Jewish traditions, we can imagine that from here, the relationship between the Jews and the Romans is going to escalate to such a level that the Jews will have no other choice but to try and revolt against the Romans, as was prophesied by Jesus. Not the revolt itself, but its outcome. And what is this outcome which Jesus prophesies, and we saw it in our last session? And I'm quoting now from Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. And Jesus went out from the temple and was going on his way, and his disciples came to him and showed him the buildings of the temple. But he answered and said unto them, You see all those things, do you not? Truly say I unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon of another that shall not be thrown down. And if you look at the image we're going to share, this is an abstract piece of art about the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70, as was prophesied. Now, I want to pause here for a second and share something from my own ordinary life. I don't know if Nathan told you this. He probably didn't. I got married 6 months ago. I got married 6 months ago, not too far from where I'm standing right now, in Jaffa on the coast. It was a beautiful event. And during the marriage Jewish ritual, I did something that my dad did and his grandfather did, and as far as we can recall, every male figure in my family did. And every Jew in the world, when they get married, they do that. You know what they do? You probably saw it in Hollywood movies. They take a glass, and just before you're about to get married, in the happiest moment of your life, you know what you do? You take that glass and you step on it and you break it. And you say, if I shall forget you, Jerusalem, let my tongue stick to the edge of my mouth. If I will not praise you, O Jerusalem, on the top, on the peak of my joy. Why do we say that? Why do we say that in our happiest moment? Yes, for sure, we remember the destruction of the temple, but why remind ourselves specifically at that moment? The idea in Jewish tradition is this. We are constantly remembering the destruction of the temple. Not just because this was the house of the Lord, because losing the temple, losing Jerusalem, is a symbol for the end of Jewish sovereignty in this land. Something that would only be renewed 72 years ago. And remember, we started session number 1 right before Independence Day. This is our broad frame in order to start better understanding Masada and the connection between Masada and modern day state of Israel. Now, where is Masada? If you look 2 photos back, right, to dismount, you can see that Masada, and my mouse is pointing at it right now, Masada is also a peripheral site. But it's a very different type of periphery from what we spoke about in Capernaum. Capernaum is a periphery that the geographical conditions still allow communities to live in. Masada, guys, as you see it over here, is a hard desert. It's one of the driest deserts in the world. It's known as the Judean desert. But there's another thing, when you look at this map, you can see about Masada. And the thing that you can see about Masada over here is the following. You can see that Masada is right on the border. Now, you don't yet know the border between who and who. Like, all right, so very clearly Masada is in the red zone. But what's in the white zone? Go back to first session. You remember we said that geographically speaking, this piece of the world has always been the meeting point between the east and the west. Masada lies in the border of what? On one hand, we have the Roman Empire. And we are here in the eastern edge of the Roman Empire. Ignore the text. It's just to try and get the message through. So on one hand, we have the edge of the Roman Empire. On the other hand, we have the Persian Empire. The way we study history in the West is a very Eurocentric way, which means you probably never heard about the great, mighty Persian Empire that existed roughly around the time of Jesus and also shortly after. But this is an empire that borders the Roman Empire. And we spoke about the fact that empires have the tendency to expand as time goes by, which means Masada marks a border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. It's in the middle of the desert. And Masada, you can see that it's a very unique shape, right? It's a mountain. It's a mountain which is the only mountain in this area which stands alone. Look, you don't have to be a geographist, or I don't know even how you pronounce that profession. But to understand, this mountain is completely alone, right? Which means any attempt to climb up on this mountain would make it practically impossible if the guy on top does not want you over there. Which means Masada is a border mountain far away from Jerusalem. And this is the place that King Herod chooses to establish his atomic bunker, let's call it like that, for a rainy day. He says, if things would ever go bad in Jerusalem, this is where I'm going to go into. Why? Because of the shape of the mountain, because of its location in the middle of the desert. This is where he plans to escape to. Now, we understand that he needs a nuclear bomb shelter, right, for any event that would happen. But you're probably asking yourself the following question. What kind of event would drive King Herod out of the comfort of his town of Jerusalem? Let's just get a feel of where Jerusalem is in relationship to us so you can get a better understanding. Jerusalem, guys, is all the way over here. This is Jerusalem, where my mouse is. Roughly, we're talking about, in terms of riding a donkey, which is the common means of transport back then, we're talking roughly about a day and a half. Why does he need to go all the way? Sorry, so going back, Jerusalem is over here. This is where King Herod spends the majority of the time, and he needs an escape route, which is going to be Masada. Who is he going to be escaping from? There are three potential threats that are always sitting in the back of the mind of King Herod. Threat number one, try and think of what you know of internal Roman politics. Stability is probably not a word we would use to describe Roman politics. King Herod, as you remember, he is a client king. He was put in office by one certain Caesar. But you know, and I know, that Caesars constantly change. When a new Caesar comes along, who knows if they're going to be in support of King Herod. So King Herod needs to have an escape plan if things would ever go wrong coming from Rome. But there's also another threat, and we've just mentioned that threat, and the threat is the Persian Empire. If the Persian Empire would ever try and expand their power, coming from the east, conquering this territory to the west, King Herod needs to be able to know he has a place to escape to, because obviously he's a Roman symbol and the Persians would not spare his life. And lastly, and the most important threat that King Herod is always aware of is the Jewish threat. You're thinking, what do you mean the Jewish threat? Like, King Herod is a Jewish king. Why should he be intimidated by the Jews? But don't forget that King Herod is Jewish by birth. He is Jewish by religion. But on the other hand, King Herod serves as the agent of change. He is the one which is bringing Roman culture into this part of the world. And the Jews don't like Roman culture. If we want to put it in today's terms, we would say that the Jews are the isolationists who want to separate themselves from any outside influence. And what King Herod is doing, he is bringing Roman culture in a suitcase, metaphorically, to their backyard. He's bringing the Roman theaters. He's bringing the bathhouses. He is bringing gladiator fights. He is bringing all of this foreign influence that the Jews don't want. Therefore, he has intimidated the Jews will try and overthrow him. And that's why he needs Masada as the unconquerable mountain in the middle of the desert that he could always escape to. Now, as you can see here, Masada is quite a large mountain. If you wanted to get a better feeling in terms of the size, walking all the way from the northern end to the eastern end would roughly take us 13 minutes, right? I said roughly in 13 minutes. All right, let's round it up for 15, right? Edge to edge, it's roughly 15 minutes of a walk. It's a massive complex. When King Herod builds it, he uses the best Roman building techniques in order to allow him to live in this atomic bunker. And there is really everything you need here to survive, and not to live like a dog, to live like a Roman king. You see those complexes over here? They look a bit like modern day containers. Those are very odd structures. To answer the first question you have in your head, at the time of King Herod, they had a roof, right? So it's not that they're exposed the same way you see them now. What we found there, we found there a massive wine cellar. One of these rooms, there are 18 of these massive rooms, was a wine cellar. On the wine vessels, we call them amphora in archaeology. It's pieces of clay. We found wine that had a label on it that was imported here all the way from Sicily. I told you before, right? Globalization. Guys, this is globalization. The fact that King Herod is able to drink in the middle of the desert, in the eastern edge of the Roman Empire, wine that he would be served in Rome, this is a globalized society. Now, once we're moving forward from here, and once we got a little bit of a feel for how big this complex really is, I want to fast forward in history. I want to tell you the following thing. Everything I told you about the potential threats of King Herod never happened. could have happened, but it didn't, which means the Jews never tried to overthrow King Herod on a large scale that really demanded him to flee to Masada, right? That never happened. The Persians, during the reign of King Herod, never expanded their empire. By the way, the border is where you see the blue border here, which is the Dead Sea. That's the border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. The Persians never tried to cross that border. And the Romans never lost faith in King Herod. Therefore, the Romans allowed him to reign until the last day he spent on this earth. But what happens after King Herod passes away? Now the picture is going to start coming together if you were with us for the last two sessions. The Romans are going to strip away the title of acclaimed king from the children of King Herod. And after they're going to strip away this title from them, what are they going to do next? They're going to appoint here client kings. I hope you can all see me in the central screen. They're going to start appointing client kings. They're going to start appointing here Roman governors, and they're going to be the ones who inherit the authority of King Herod. Now, you can imagine that the escalation in the relationship between the Jews and the Roman occupying soldiers is going to deteriorate immediately. Why? Because look, with all the faults of King Herod, there's some things you can't take away from him. For example, King Herod knows what it means to celebrate the day of the Sabbath. He's a Jew. King Herod understands that, God forbid, we will put any image or statue in the temple in Jerusalem. This is unheard of. But for a Roman governor who doesn't know anything about Judaism, for him, Judaism is an odd religion. And in any other part of their empire, if you don't have a statue of the Caesar in your temple, that's considered to be some sort of treason, then you can imagine that the relationship is going to escalate. This escalation is going to reach a peak. And that peak is going to be reached in the year 66, where the Jews in this province are going to go on a full-scale military revolt, trying to overthrow the Roman oppression. Now, guys, don't be too judgmental about those people. Those people had the historical image of an event that happened 150 years before. What is that event? Yeah, remember that 150 years before, the Jews living here, the Maccabees, have already defeated one superpower. What superpower? The Greeks. Therefore, they're saying if we did it before, there's nothing that will prevent us from doing it again. What they didn't know is that the Greeks, they didn't have the historical perspective we have, right? The Greeks were a falling empire while the Romans are a rising empire. And the ability of the local population in Judea to defeat the almighty Roman Empire is practically non-existent. So the Jews have a few victories at first. Why do they have victories? Because they catch the Romans unready. As time proceeds, as time goes by, as time moves ahead, the Jews are losing battle after battle. As they're losing battle after battle, they're at the end losing the last Jewish outpost, the most sacred Jewish site, which is the temple in Jerusalem that we have seen before, right? They're losing the temple in Jerusalem. In the beginning of the revolt, there was a group of zealot Jews that decided to go on a bold military operation. Everyone knew of the mountain that stands alone in the middle of the desert, known as Masada. And their mission is to conquer this mountain. Who lives on this mountain back then? Small group of Roman soldiers, maybe 40. So what the Jews do, the zealots do, they're climbing up the narrow path. What I told you before, this suicide mission, right? They're doing it in the middle of the night. And they're making an oath that if one of them will fall down, they will not make a sound. And they're catching the Roman guards by surprise. They're not ready for it. And they manage to capture Masada. And Masada, from a Roman military fortress built by King Herod, Masada turns into a Jewish military outpost. But what happens as time goes by? We said the Jews lose battle after battle after battle, the Roman Empire. And after every battle, what naturally happens? Some people are taken as slaves, some people are killed, and some people flee as refugees. Now, look, guys, if you would be living at the time, what is the most rational place for you to try to escape to when the world around you is collapsing? The simple answer is go to the temple, go to Jerusalem. But at this point, Jerusalem is already under siege. The name Masada is whispered from ear to ear. Try and imagine a group of refugees walking around. Where are you going to go next? What are you going to do? You lost your wife, or you lost your husband, or you lost your children. You have no one in the world. I heard that the Zealots took over Masada. Let's make our way over here. And this mountain that we have seen before now converts itself from what it was before, a Jewish military outpost. Masada now becomes a massive Jewish refugee. And in the process, all the Roman buildings that you see here gain a Jewish purpose. For example, the Jews take the Roman bathhouses and turn them into a mikveh. Remember what a mikveh is? We spoke about it in our last session. A mikveh is a Jewish ritual bath. It's a natural part of the Jewish life cycle. I'll put it very simply. You cannot get married. You cannot have children. You cannot participate in prayer without going into the mikveh, which means if they're building a mikveh, they're planning to live here their Jewish life. Now, they didn't only build here a mikveh. Do you see what's in the background over here, right behind me? This is a Roman stable, which means at the time of King Herod, this is where they tied their horses. And the Jews who are coming over here are converting this stable into a synagogue. Now, you remember, what do you need a synagogue for? Synagogue is what we call the JCC, the Jewish Community Center. This is where the community gets together. This is where the younger generation is being taught. This is where the elders sit down and argue. But something very special happens in the synagogue. This synagogue exists when the people living in Masada hear the news that in the year 70, the temple is destroyed. The worst possible news that any Jew living at any era could hear. There's no longer a temple. Now, perhaps, this is, I don't know for a fact, but perhaps this is one of the first places in the world, that people have asked themselves, without a temple, how do I keep my Jewish identity? How do I stay a Jew without me offering my sacrifices in the temple? And perhaps this is the first place in the world that the decision was made. Let the words of our mouth become a replacement for our sacrifice. Let prayer become canonized. And since then, I don't know if you know this, Jews pray 3 times a day up until this day. The name of the morning prayer is named after the morning sacrifice offered in the temple. The name of the midday prayer is the name of the midday sacrifice offered in the temple. Same thing goes for the evening prayer. This is perhaps one of the first places in the world those rituals started in. Now, how do I know it's a synagogue, right? I mean, look behind me over here. There's no clear indication. You're probably thinking of synagogue, Star of David. Although by now you should know that Star of David was not a Jewish sign back then, right? He said the menorah was. So where's the menorah? There is no menorah here. So how do we know in archaeology that the building that I'm now standing behind it is a synagogue? And the answer is, we have found here a scroll. I want to show you what the scroll looks like for just a second. We have found here a scroll, which is one of the most ancient scrolls that was ever found in Jewish history. It's roughly the same age as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's written in Hebrew like what we saw in our last session, in the same Hebrew that I read in every day. And this scroll could have been any of the books of the Old Testament, right? Could have been Genesis, could have been Leviticus, could have been Deuteronomy, like you name it, could have been anything. But we have found there something very, very specific. Almost as if the people living there have planted this for us to find. And I'm going to read to you the exact scripture that was found in the very place that I'm standing in just one second. Before I read it to you, I want to tell you something about the people you saw a second ago excavating this site. Masada was excavated in the 1960s. In the 1960s, the sentiment towards the Holocaust in Israeli society is extremely strong. Most Israelis living in Israel in the 1960s has probably been directly impacted by the Holocaust. Directly impacted is, for me, a very whitewashed term to say he have lost loved ones. First, like from first family relatives, parents, daughters, sisters. Even if he didn't, the stories and the memory of the Holocaust is very dominant within Israeli society. I don't know if you've ever seen the photos of the liberation of the German Gedef camps. And you see piles of bones, like it's beyond comprehension, stacked up on top of the other. And the Allies, when they came in, they had to bulldoze them down because they didn't know and they didn't have the logistical ability to bury them. Now, when the people are digging here and they find this scroll, this is an image which they have running in the back of their mind. I'm going to read to you from the book of Ezekiel. That's what they found here, the book of Ezekiel, not the full book, just a small portion, chapter number 37. And the hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. And he asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life, and I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. And I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you know that I'm the Lord. So I prophesied as it was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, and I looked at the tendons and flesh that appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to breathe. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds of the earth into these slain bones, so that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone, and we're cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put spirit in you, and you will live. And I will put and settle you in your own land. Then you know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I've done it, declares the Lord. You realize, out of all the books of the Bible, that's what they found over here. A lot of the people excavating here in the 1960s, they're secular. A lot of them are even, God forbid, atheists. But to them, this prophecy has been fulfilled by them coming back to Masada 2,000 years later and finding this ancient parchment. Now, we're about to bring it to a closure within the next 10 minutes. But we still need to understand what happened to the people of Masada. Because as far as we're concerned, the temple in Jerusalem had fallen, but they are still continuing to live over here. But we know that the Romans will have no tolerance for any attempt of any nation to stand up to the almighty Roman Empire. And we can imagine that once Jerusalem falls, what's going to be next? Masada is going to be next. Now, you have seen the location of Masada. You have seen the logistical effort that it will take to conquer a mountain like this. Look at how steep the walls of this mountain are. But the Romans are not going to spare any effort. And 3 years after the temple in Jerusalem had fallen, the Roman army is going to come to Masada to make sure that the last sign of Jewish resistance, the last sign of Jewish sovereignty, will fall. Why are the Romans doing that? If you ask me, they're not doing it for the Jews. The Jews have learned their lesson with the destruction of the temple. They know that they have lost the Romans. The Romans are sending a message from Masada to the rest of the Roman Empire. They will not tolerate any kind of resistance. And the Romans are sieging in Masada. I would imagine the people living up on top here, at first, they have a lot of faith in their mountain. The mountain, which is the unconquerable mountain. But the Romans, we know, they're not going to let anything stop. And as time goes by, the Romans are going to build a ramp. And what you see over here is the original ramp built by the Roman soldiers with the assistance of Jewish slaves. This ramp was supposed to allow the Roman battering ram to be run up this mountain, break through the wall, and let the Romans conquer Masada. And the people living up on top are living in great fear. They're living in great fear because literally they see that the end is getting closer every single day, and there's nothing they can do. Masada is surrounded by 7 Roman camps. Now, it's hard to believe that those Roman camps have survived for 2,000 years, but when you look at the squares, 1, 2, and there are 5 more surrounding Masada, those squares are the original Roman camps. Try and think about it. They take the tents, right? They take the swords, they take the food. The only thing which is left is the piles of rubble that they do to mark the boundaries of their camp. This is still here. And after 3 months of the siege, when the ramp is complete, and it is clear and inevitable that the Romans are going to conquer Masada the next day, the leader of Masada, Eleazar ben Yair, gathers the other 20 leaders of Masada. And he tells them, my brave comrades, our road here has come to an end. Let us be remembered as the ones who did not surrender to the Romans. Let our sons not taste the taste of slavery. And let our daughters and wives not be abused. Let us make our own destiny and take our own lives and not give the Romans the pleasure of stripping us from our honor and our lives. What is he asking them to do? He's asking them to go and kill 1,000 people, women, children, their own wives, their own families, in order for them not to fall in the hands of the Romans. No wonder they're known as the Zealots. The less known fact about the story of Masada is the first time he gives that speech, they refuse. And the next day, the Romans are already bringing the battering ram all the way over here. And it's clear that that's it. It's going to be done tomorrow. And he gives them the exact same speech once again. And this time they go ahead and they do it. And the 20 men inform the other leaders of the families, and each one goes into their own home and they kill the people they love best, they love most. Those are Jews who were refugees, who fled from the Galilee, who fled from siege Jerusalem, who fled from all over the land to the last place where Jews lived in freedom. And they find themselves killed by their own swords. and after it's all said and done, the same 20 meet in the same in a different site in Masada, and they draw out lots to see which of the 19 would fall on his own sword and would kill the other. Sorry, which one of the 19 would kill the others and will fall on his own sword. What we see here is something we've recovered in the archaeological excavations. It's pieces of pottery. And one of those pieces of pottery is the name of the leader of Masada. His name is Elazar ben Yair. That's his piece of pottery, and some archaeologists assume that this is the lots that they used here 2,000 years ago. Now, Masada does not just fall as an individual site. Masada ends a historical era of 2,000 years roughly 2,000 years of Jewish sovereignty. And it will introduce us to the next 2,000 years of Jewish life in the diaspora. Before we go there, 60 years after Masada, there's going to be another last attempt for Jewish sovereignty in this land. I assume most of you never heard of it. It's not something that is too much known outside the Jewish world. It's called the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Bar Kokhba Revolt is another attempt for Jewish freedom against the Romans, the year 132. And the end result of it is the largest Jewish catastrophe until the Holocaust. 500,000 Jewish casualties, roughly half to a third of all the Jews that were living at the time are killed by the Romans. And this is the introduction of Jewish life in the diaspora, where the Jews are living as a minority. Now, after this event, the Jewish leaders at the time are sitting down and they're saying, look, we need to stop this vicious circle. We can't have our people going and rebelling every 60 years, because guess what? In 60 years, there will be no more Jews in the world. So we need to change the DNA, to reprogram the Jews that they are now going to enter a long time where they are going to be a minority. And therefore, we don't need to teach them resistance. We need to teach them resilience. It's not time for you to make your own destiny by bearing arms and fighting. It's time for you to wait patiently for godly redemption. That's the Jewish philosophy of the past 2,000 years. I don't know if you even know that the rabbis living 1,900 years ago have also changed Jewish history in order to serve this purpose. What do I mean? We all know the story of Hanukkah, right? Nod your heads if you know the story of Hanukkah, right? What do we celebrate in Hanukkah? Hanukkah classically is a classic military victory. The Jews, who were few, the Maccabees, defeated the Greeks, who were many. It's a classic military holiday. What do we celebrate instead? I don't know if you've ever thought of that. We celebrate the miracle of the oil container lasting not one day, right? How many days? 8 days. Think of the messaging here. Who made that miracle? Was it the almighty Maccabees with their heroism? No. It was God. You wait for God to redeem. This allows you to understand the image of the Jews, their self-image for 2,000 years. We're not going to bear arms. We're not going to go and take bold, active steps. We're holding on to our tradition and waiting for God to redeem us. This was the reality for the past 1,900 years. What happened 150 years ago? We have the Spring of Nations. Nations in Europe started to say, we have a right for self-determination on our own land. And the Jews are living in Europe and they're impacted by that. I want to tell you something. What is a national movement really based on? National movement, if you ask me, it's an imagined glorious past. Whether it's true or not factually doesn't make a difference. What matters is that you and I and him, we all have this imagined glorious past that will serve as the glue that will keep our imagined community together in the future. The Jews created their own national movement known as Zionism. And when they were flipping through the Jewish history books, they're like, oh, wait, where's all the stories of Jewish heroism? They were taken out of the history books in order to serve the purpose. What is the purpose? That you wait for God to redeem you. But how convenient that everything you see around you, over here, as an archaeological site, let's just get the right image. Everything you see here was discovered the same time as the Zionist movement. Masada was discovered as an archaeological site. It was known as a story, but it was not found as a site. And the Zionist movement took Masada and hugged it, and it became the pillar of Zionism. Because when you think of the story I just told you, it has everything that a national movement needs. People who are connected to their land, people who are willing to fight for the land, people who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for their land. That's something you can build a national movement on. And in the 1920s, for instance, this, before the creation of the State of Israel, this was a place that young Jews living in Palestine came here. Do you see number 9 over here? I don't know if you know the name Shimon Peres. He's the former Israeli president that passed away. He is here as a 16-year-old making his way up to Masada. In 1948, Masada was excavated. Everyone knew the story of Masada in the scientific community. There were lines of scholars who were willing to come dig here with their own hands. But the State of Israel insisted the only ones who would dig here are going to be Israeli soldiers. Why? Because of the symbolism. The new Jewish army is excavating the ancient roots of the ancient Jewish army. We found here skeletons. No one knows if those skeletons were really Jews or perhaps they're Romans who came over here. Nobody knows. But they were given, listen to this, a full IDF military burial ceremony. That's the level of craziness that this country took Masada in. This is our narrative. As a result of that, Masada has become a site where Israeli soldiers are now brought to swear in. This was the norm in the IDF up until the 1960s. Since the 1960s, not all units swear in here. Some are saying that we should. Some are saying, what is the message we're sending from swearing in over here? But Masada was used by the Zionist narrative as a way to build a collective story after 2,000 years. They spoke quite a bit, I know. This story is just kind of impossible to stop in the middle. And any questions you have, now is the time.
So you can do questions, just speak up, or you can do them through the chat feature if you aren't able, and I can ask them as well.
Is everyone frozen or?
No, we're there.
Actually, can you hear me, Asaf?
Yeah.
Sorry, so I have my screen turned up. I guess I could turn it on. Hi.
Hey.
So I actually had a quick question. You were talking about how with the battering ramp that the Roman soldiers were using it to like capture Masada. And I remember when we were actually at Masada that you mentioned a group, I don't remember who, that was trying to like recapture it from the Romans. And I remember just like this really terrible story about how they were using slaves, but they were their own people. And so as they were like getting up to Masada, they realized they were like killing themselves. Can you kind of refresh on that? Because I'm getting kind of confused on which group was who.
Okay. I know exactly what you're referring to. Just because we're in a shorter time frame, I didn't go into it in my guiding. When the Romans built the Roman ramp, it was not uncommon to use Jewish slaves. This is 4 years after the fall of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a very big city, 100,000 people. Let's say that 50% of them were taken as slaves. What is a rational route to take those slaves in? To build Roman military facilities, for example, the ramp into Masada. And therefore, it is, and if you remember, I said this is not a fact, it's a theory, but it's a very common theory, that we believe that there's a very high likelihood that the people who built the ramp were Jews who were captured in Jerusalem 3 years before. And the people living up on top of Masada, the natural thing, when you see a ramp coming your way, what's a natural thing to do? Take whatever building material you have around you and just roll it down to prevent that ramp from being finished. And you know how sometimes people say, oh my gosh, right? As like when something really bad almost happens. So back then, the common prayer was Shema Yisrael. And the story is that when they threw down the stones, they realized that they're not throwing them on Roman soldiers. They're throwing it on fellow Jews who fell slaves, who became Roman slaves when Jerusalem fell.
So then, sorry, quick follow-up. Just like hypothesizing, of course. So do you think that I think that was probably one of the factors in like not throwing building materials down, like you're killing your own people. But if you think that they would have, do you think that at the end it would have been inevitable that it would, like Masada would have been captured? Or do you think that there could have been some other outcome?
So again, when I guide everything on the site, I say that the reason I feel okay not sharing the story, because it wouldn't, in my opinion, end the end result. The Romans would have continued throwing slave labor on this ramp until it would be finished. They would not spare any effort in making sure that Masada would fall. They went into the middle of the desert and put a 3-month siege on this isolated mountain in the middle of nowhere. They would have built this ramp no matter what.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Asaf? I don't see any in the group chat either yet. I don't think so.
Nathan, yeah, hi, Sydney.
Asaf, when a tour group goes, which I get to go in December, hopefully, how do you get to Masada? By bus, and then do you walk up a lot?
So you're asking a really good question. You can take a cable car all the way up, and today we're using a new cable car. But I just want to share with you something interesting, that the cable car that was there up until 1997 did not make it all the way up to the top of the mountain. Made it almost to the top, and then you had 10 stairs to climb up. It's not very wheelchair friendly, of course, but if you try and wrap in everything I said, the reason it was like that, so anyone coming to Masada, even if they can't walk the whole thing, will have the sense of accomplishment that they didn't visit Masada. They climbed Masada. Then after 1997, they realized that's a little bit of a silly idea, because then people can't see it if they're in a wheelchair. But this is how big this myth was for this country. But you'll take the cable car, nothing to worry about.
There are people who do hike it, right, Asaf?
Mm-hmm.
But typically very early in the morning because of the extreme heat.
In the winter, you can climb it any hour, but if you are walking it, it is highly recommended to see the sunrise from there. You have the mountains of Jordan on the other side, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning, you see the sun slowly making its way over this mountain range. It's quite beautiful. Even when I need to wake up at 2:30 in the morning to drive clients from Tel Aviv to see it, it's still worthwhile.
Okay, thank you very much. It looks beautiful, very interesting.
Well, you got the spoiler.
Asaf, do you have any teasers for Wednesday at 1:30?
Sure. So we finished the story of Masada, but we didn't fully finish the story of Masada, because a last photo I showed you was of Israeli soldiers swearing in Masada. And one of the Israeli soldiers who swore in Masada was also my dad in 1973, when he was enlisting to the IDF. And if up until now we spoke about very biblical events, and today we kind of bridged the gap and took the biblical events or the events from the first century and connected them to modern day state of Israel. So our last session tomorrow is going to be a dive in to Israeli modern day history through the story of my family, who comes from two polar sides of the world. My dad is a son to Holocaust survivors from Europe. My mom is a descendant of the longest living Jewish community in one place, in Iraq, in Babylon. And both my parents were born in Israel, but my grandparents were not. So tomorrow we're going to continue our story through trying to follow from my dad swearing into Masada, going back and forth in my family's history.
That'll be Wednesday, not tomorrow.
Yeah. Not
Yep.
tomorrow, sorry.
Yep. Wednesday at 1:30. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you all. If you guys have any questions for Asaf, his website is easily found, bokertours.com. You can send him an email, or you can send me one, and I'll ask him, and he'll make sure to answer. So thank you so much, Asaf, one more time
All
on
right.
Wednesday, and we'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for coming, and hopefully see you on Wednesday.
All right. Thank you, guys.